Speaking to you from beautiful Philadelphia, I want to explain to you one very important and overlooked fact about foreshadowing. Yesterday I was reading Down and Out in Paris and London by George Orwell, and I realized, wow, he's making use of second period for a brief section of the paragraph I was reading. So for that reason, I'm going to start out this video making use of second person. Here we go. You have a new story idea. It's a great story idea. You're very excited about it. You can see it all more or less at once, like you're looking at a map. So you know where it's going to start. You know who the protagonist is, you have a good idea about where that protagonist is going to go, the different events that will lead up to that one exciting event that, more than any other part of the story, makes it an exciting story. And yes, it will be very much a climax, so you can look at that exciting event as the main climax of your new story. So you start writing. And like Google Maps, when you start writing, it's sort of like your point of view drifts down and falls on that map, and suddenly you can't see where the story is going. You're like an ant on the map. You're the viewpoint of your protagonist. You're looking, and as you're writing, the story suddenly gets boring. You know that it's leading to that exciting event. But how has this very exciting story suddenly become boring? You start at the beginning, you know where it's going, and through writing, as you write your way from the beginning toward the end of the story, suddenly the experience is boring. What is missing is foreshadowing. Foreshadowing is when you give the reader a sense of what will happen in your story. Just to make it clear, I'm switching out of second person now. I'll go ahead and go back into first person. What I have done is that I've gone ahead and finished first draft. Like someone driving a plow, no stopping to ask questions, no stopping to ask directions, no stopping to muse the details of the scenery. I'm going to plow through that first draft because as a writer, it's a desperate situation. All bets are riding on finishing that first draft. So boring or not boring, I'm going to plow through this boring rendition of my exciting story and finish first draft. Next thing I do is I turn right around and I look back and ask myself, how can I put foreshadowing into the beginning of the story all the way through to the end of the story? A story is like a song in that it takes place. It's a linear experience. It starts at the beginning, and through time, it's like a roller coaster ride that your reader goes on toward the end. The reader never looks at the story as a whole, as they might look at it like they're looking at a map. They see it taking place along this one dimension of time from beginning to end. All along the way, what you are doing is you are doling out bits of information for your reader. Now, that information, you telling the story, does it or does it not induce a state of anticipation? Foreshadowing, the best kind of foreshadowing is when it is inducing a state of anticipation. Information provided to an audience that causes them to think about what could or might happen. An argument could be made that in a very suspenseful story, there does not necessarily need to be a climax. Now, I'm not saying, I'm just saying that for the reader experience, it is that state of anticipation that causes the most enjoyment of a story. Let's just say that someone is watching a movie and they don't get a chance to see the end of the movie. So they never do get to that climax. They never get to the point where the couple falls in love or finally are able to get together, or that there's the great shootout, or that the ship sinks, whatever that major event is. The viewer never gets to see it, and yet they're enthralled by this movie because when they see the early half, it causes them to anticipate all the things that could happen due to what is happening in the story. Now, if you go through and you make sure that your story follows the law of cause and effect, that's going to do most of your foreshadowing work for you. If you make sure that your story, your plot is solid to this happened because this happened, and there are consequences to everything that takes place in the story, that's going to naturally develop many layers of foreshadowing in your story. That being said, like one of the good Coen brothers films, you can even bring up the amperage. You can make it even that much more suspenseful by, when you work on your later drafts, work on the quality of anticipation that you estimate your writing to create in the viewer. Here's an example. A woman walks into a room. She looks over at a chair by a desk. She sits down on the chair. There's a magazine on the desk. She picks it up and starts looking at it. She turns to page 11. If that were a section of a story I was writing and I was doing draft work for foreshadowing, I would look at that and I would say, okay, that part of the story is, I don't detect any foreshadowing at all. It doesn't lead me to wonder what could happen at all. Here's another example. A woman walks up to a car. The window is rolled down on the car. She looks all around her. She glances in the car. She takes a closer look in the car. She looks around the parking lot again. She opens the door of the car, pushes up the seat, and climbs into the back seats of the car, closes the door, and hides down below the seats in the back seat of the car. So you can see the foreshadowing in that second example. That second example is rich with implied what could happen, what might be going on. It induces a state of anticipation. As a side note, good writing is not about inducing a state of anticipation all the time. It's great to have contrast within a story, so you can have the quiet spots. If you have quiet spots in a story, it'll make the exciting spots even that more exciting. So you don't need to induce anticipation all the time, but be aware of when you want to induce anticipation, and look at the story as it's taking place in the present moment. That could be in Act 1, and ask yourself, how much anticipation am I generating here? In that second example, I was being fairly obvious, but inducing a great sense of anticipation, it's really fun in our attempts to become better writers. We don't always have to be so obvious. Even it can be very subtle. Here's the third example. The same woman is sitting in a waiting room. She glances down and she notices a pen, a writing pen, a very nice writing pen. there on the table with the magazines. She reaches into her purse, takes out a handkerchief, and very carefully with the handkerchief takes the pen, wraps it up in the handkerchief, and puts that in her purse. So in this third example, not so obvious there, we aren't setting off fireworks here, we're not jumping around shouting at the top of our lungs in order to try to generate excitement. We're being very subtle here in generating a state of anticipation. Do you see what I'm getting at here? I have not disclosed to you any kind of climax. We think of the climax or some of, there can be more than one climaxes in a story. We think of that as the exciting part of the story, but my point here is that most of the excitement in the story is well before a climax happens. We think of foreshadowing as foreshadowing what will happen in the story, but that absolutely does not need to be the case. What if I happen to be working on a story where I want the surprise ending to very much be a surprise ending? What kind of foreshadowing would I include in that story? Or how about a story where there are a lot of twists and turns, where there's going to be a great change of circumstances? Wouldn't I have very different foreshadowing before that great change, and then what the foreshadowing would be like after that great change? So as you gain a very clear awareness of the foreshadowing in your writing, it's very liberating to realize that the foreshadowing can be very different than what actually happens. And especially the climax, as long as the foreshadowing makes sense, as long as it is in tune with the cause and effect, you're still giving the audience a great ride, and they aren't going to be disappointed if you have been foreshadowing that the story is about a town so much in drought that the residents may need to move, and it turns out that the story's really about whether someone is going to reunite with someone they haven't seen for 10 years. As long as the foreshadowing makes sense to what is happening at each interval of the story, that is what is going to give it its greatest strength. So as long as you write in such a way, as long as you give clues, as long as you create scenarios that make the reader wonder what could happen, that is foreshadowing. It does not necessarily have to indicate at all about what will eventually happen. And in fact, the best kind of story writing is when the reader is wondering, like a detective trying to figure out what will happen, and is still surprised by the event, by the final great event. I hope that was helpful. I hope you drive your readers crazy with anticipation. If you like what I'm doing here and want to get me back, please hit the like button, subscribe, leave a comment. You will greatly help my efforts if you share this video through Twitter, Facebook, Stumbled Upon. Please take the time to go check out this mammoth story I'm working on, Terrible Immunity. It is at solomation.com, illustrated in video episodes, all free to watch, solomation.com. Also, I have t-shirts. There's a link below. You can help fund my creative efforts. I hope you have a great time being creative and get a lot of writing done. I hope you find new writing ideas that inspire you, and have a good day.